Hi, and welcome to this live reading from War Horses Book 1, Chevalier by Scott Warren. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, The Vandal of Teutonia. From the radio chatter, I expected the third formation of the Chevalier Security Company's upright tanks to come back from their combat patrol looking more like a workaholic's punch card than a squadron of main battle uprights. My repair buggy tires shrieked across Monocrete as I raced between the upright tank berths to meet the returning jockeys and assess the damage for myself. Since it was my job to patch those tanks, I pitched a fit just for the sake of it, which of course no one heard, since this particular maintenance buggy had only one occupant, yours truly. But trust me, it was scathing. I made it to the berths just in time to catch Dirty Rocco climbing down the rungs from Mariluck's smoking chassis and waving in my direction. He was first out of his upright. The others were still navigating into repair berths or cooling down their reactors. "Randall the Vandal," he said, pulling off his helmet and shaking the sweat from his hair. "It's actually Rande Vandal, but everyone in the private military companies goes by nicknames. I got mine the day I first met Dirty Rocco on my home world, Teutonia." He had caught me next to the colonel's air car with most of its motor disassembled and "Fascists Go Home" painted on the side of it. Being 14 and supremely ignorant at the time, I didn't really know who or what a fascist was, only that it was imperative they leave Teutonia. I had nearly shat myself when he grabbed me from behind. I expected the fuming, bearded mercenary to put a bullet through my younger self's head. Instead, Rocco put a spanner in my hand and watched me fix the car bolt by bolt under a withering barrage of creative and unrepeating descriptions of the bodily harm to avail me should I misplace a single retaining nut. It turned out I'd be leaving Teutonia with Rocco, and I've been Vandal of the Chevalier's Auxiliary Division ever since. That was 8 years, 4 planets, and 5 contracts ago. "Damn, Rocco, I just got Marmaluck back up to spec. You take her out for 1 day and she comes back more whole than tank." I looked up at the hulking upright, a heavy-hitting 175-ton war machine with 4 anti-armor repeaters still steaming from their heat exchangers. Her forward ballistic shrouds had been shredded, and Rocco had fired every missile in her racks. The coal-fire smell of spent gunpowder wafted down from the point defense array. Marmaluck's forward hull bore countless pockmarks from small arms fire. One armored feed belt leading to the massive penetrator drums on her back had been completely mangled by heavy caliber fire. There wasn't an armor panel left untouched on the front of her chassis. Marmaluck draws a lot of fire, but then that's her purpose. She's a heavyweight brawler, a bulwark with legs, much like her jockey. Rocco shrugged and worked one of his shoulders, wincing. Rebels were waiting for us with Planetary Garrison Corps anti-tank batteries, 135mm penetrators with explosive tips. That kind of firepower can crack ballistic omnithylene. As if we could afford armor like that. Ultradense polymer has saved my hide plenty anyway. How soon to refit and rearm? I grabbed my docket pad from the cart and thumbed the screen on, walking closer to assess the damage. The blackened holes in the polymer of Marmaluck's hide had exposed superstructure and magnetic fiber underneath. I pursed my lips. 2 days. I can get your guns offloaded and over to the armory tonight, but Arden's has priority. She's got a maintenance patrol tomorrow morning. "Joyriding that old warhorse, eh?" Rocco demanded, toothy grin splitting his black beard. "Careful, a stiff breeze might blow that thing ass over tea kettle." "And you'd follow pretty quick if Swift heard you talk about the love of her life that way," I said. "Not like she ever takes it out anymore," he said. "It's old Pacha's up right now, but I'm going to tell her you're riding naked in her upright on your maintenance patrols, and we'll see who bends who over what." "You'd better not," I said. Rocco laughed. "Hey, want to know what it's like to take a 135mm round?" He took a low shot at my gut as he walked past, grinning like an idiot, but I slipped out of reach from sheer habit. He hopped on the back of my buggy, and I swung back in the driver's seat in front of him. Rocco's an equal opportunity asshole. He'll do just about anything to get a rise out of someone. He claims he just does it to see if he can get a reaction. He also claims he's gotten 3 kills with 1 over-penetrating shell. I guess what I'm saying is that Rocco is a liar. He's also my oldest friend in the Chevaliers and the formation commander of the 3rd Chevaliers. Rocco tossed his plate carrier into the back of my buggy, waving down Pacha, another of the Chevaliers' returning jockeys. Pacha pulled on his overcoat and joined us, climbing into the flatbed and clapping the top of my shoulder with a grunt. Compound still in one piece, I see. Sweat gleamed on Pacha's forehead. I looked at Cossack, the mid-sized MBU he'd been running. It was slathered in sand and caked with monocrete dust. That was going to be a bitch to clean. But the cracked polymer armor and shredded ballistic arms on its right side were the bigger issue. It looked like he'd taken serious anti-armor shots from conventional takes on the patrol. How'd the local rebels get planetary garrison core gear? I asked over the noise of the bay, weaving the buggy between maintenance spots and other tech. Planetary garrison corps are the rebels, Vandal, said Pacha. The turncoat company hit us using the Catalan's own toys to bid for independence. The governor's got a little insurrection on his hands. Anything serious? Nothing we can't handle. Take your time with Ardennes. I kind of like running an MBU built this century. I followed his gaze up to Cossack's four-angled airburst cannons, even if she is a glorified anti-aircraft battery. I added Marmaluk and Cossack to the maintenance docket pad and put the buggy in gear while I looked over the damage assessments filtering in from the other maintenance bays. Dirty Rocco definitely had the worst of it, though a few of the smaller recon uprights got a little scorched too. But now the rebels had got their hands on military-grade hardware. The local riffraff wasn't supposed to have anything that could rough up our cav company. That was half the reason the Catalan Templars had withdrawn their troops and contracted out security to private military companies, and why the Chevaliers had taken the contract. The other half was that they just couldn't be arsed to protect themselves. Tayunta, along with my homeworld Teutonia and a few hundred other worlds, lay in the Gulf of Hercules. It's a region of space sandwiched between a clan of pompous idiots called the Catalan Empire and the holdings of a dozen colossal assholes called the 12 under heaven, unruly princes of the infinite emirate. They call it a gulf because it's got fewer stars than most of the nearby regions, and it's hard to justify the cost of standing armies protecting vast swaths of empty space. Hard enough, in fact, that every significant world here is disputed. The map of borders resembles a spilled pot of spaghetti. Once one side seizes a world, they install a puppet governor to manage terrestrial peacekeeping funded by the planet. Then they hire private military companies to do the heavy lifting. And there's a lot of us. Some people call this the Gulf of Heroes or the Mercenary Gulf. Most of the time, mercs were enough to keep a big push from fomenting. But if some of the local regiments were starting to turn, then things couldn't be going well for the Catalan governor. Not that I cared about local politics or interstellar ones, but a savvy mercenary always wants to be on the team that's already winning, or for an exorbitant fee on the team that they think can only win with the company's help. Ever the unflappable Rocco. Though I did sometimes wonder, those holes were big enough to put my fist through without touching the sides. How do you shrug something like that off? Say, how come we're always on the side of dictators and never rebels or freedom fighters? I asked. Because people only rebel when they're broke, so what would they hire us with? Said Rocco. Always? Pretty much, yeah. You're always broke, though, I said. So the only things you ever rebel against are your belt line and your bar tab. Pacha guffawed behind me. Rocco reached forward and smacked the back of my head, but I couldn't keep the grin off my face. Pacha leaned in. War is an expression of capitalism, nothing more. A gun for hire should remain apart from political fuck games. If you say so, I said, as if I understood what any of that meant. Pacha is always saying weird shit like that, and I'm always just smiling, nodding, and patching up the results of those political expressions. He's what you'd call a book-learned type. I hummed and continued driving in the shadow of the other returning war machines. I'd do plenty of wrenching on them myself. Being contracted on an industrial planet with top-shelf refit and rearm berths makes my life sweet and simple, but there's just something about the feel of welding, grinding, and filling shrapnel holes by hand. I waved to most of the other jockeys dismounting from their uprights. The patrol hadn't been full force, just third formation, a pair of main battle uprights with fire-based support and a smattering of the smaller recon models whose jockeys were disembarking. Papa Felix waved back from the open top of his recon walker, bushy white eyebrows wiggling at me with conspiratorial intent. Drinks later. He's the oldest jockey in the company, and it's not a narrow margin. Tanya Espinosa sent mock salutes my way as she rode down gantry with her co-pilot from their super heavy fire base upright, a colossal tank named Destrier. easily twice the size of the other MPUs. Honestly, I'd take any attention from Tanya, or Sable, as we called her. The first time I saw her pull off her helmet and shake out her mane of black hair, copper cheeks barely flushed red, hollow of her throat slick and shiny with sweat, I instantly proposed. I was 14 years old then, a ganger filled with toxin vinegar, thinking I was bad because someone had inked a skull behind my ear with a hairpin. Little did I know I was talking to the dark horse of the Chevaliers and that she could dismantle me in or out of the cockpit. We're closer than family now, but every time she shakes off that helmet, I swear I'm 14 years old again. Diego El Diablo Santana has never let me live that bit of embarrassing history down and flaunts the fact he co-pilots with her every chance he gets, flashing me the horns with both hands from behind her back. I don't let it get to me, though. I'm one of the few people in the company who knows what Team Diablo really plays for after being lucky enough to witness when some of Rocco's antics didn't end as expected. Runty Dan Harris, the youngest jockey, just flipped me a rude gesture on the way down from his recon operate. He landed by his knee joints, which had been hammered by what looked like small arms fire and light plasma. I smiled at him while I reached over and dragged Lancer to the bottom of the repair docket and kept driving. Okay, so his call sign isn't actually Runty, but it ought to be, and it's the only one you'll hear from me. Got himself a height complex, which means he's one of those jockeys who thinks only jockeys deserve respect and everyone else is roadkill. If he were a wrench turner, then jockeys would be the over-promoted smooth-brained cockpit humpers only good for breaking maintenance as tanks, which, to be fair, they are. You know the sort. Then we got to my favorite girl. Arden knelt in the blast berth. Her bulldog rail cannon barrels ran parallel to the deck at the end of stubby arms. Articulated ballistic panels spread above the dark, like a dark angel's wings on freshly greased white rails. The black and blue urban pattern Challenger class NBU stalked battlefields at least 40 years before any other model in the Bay. Pretty much every part of her had been broken, swapped out, and replaced enough times to rebuild a second Arden. You sure you don't want her back? I asked, looking up at the old NBU. Pacha hopped down with Rocco, glanced up at Arden with his hand on his chin. Trying to break a few more systems, actually, if it ain't too much trouble, he said. He rubbed his fingers into my shoulders, looking up at the ancient war machine. She could be yours. You know that, right? I looked at the bullet holes on the formation's uprights. Not a chance, Pacha. I'll stick to wrenching on her. He snapped his fingers as he walked out. Worth a shot, he called over his shoulder. Don't forget drinks later, Vandal. I shook my head. Pacha ran Arden like an old clunker, but this warhorse was still spry once you learned how to unlock her secrets. She was even more beautiful if you liked the curves of a mirrored, armored sabot belt and the smell of railgun grease and leaking refrigerant. Okay, so she wasn't much to look at or smell, but she'd grow on you. Arden was the company's colonel's old MBU, and I suspected she kept it around for sentimentality as much as for having another frontline battle upright. I checked the docket and found her repairs almost completed. Not content to wait for the bots to tighten every bolt, I decided to jump in and apply my own elbow grease where needed, sometimes percussively. Arden was a stubborn mistress, but every time I dug into her, I learned something new about her past lovers. In this case, the initials and date of the last person to service the cracked and repaired omnithylene armor panel behind the left shoulder. JD, AUG-3564. Almost 10 years ago. Yikes. Crossed out the date and added my own initials below with a grease pencil. Most of the other Chevaliers auxiliary techs had finished up and left the night shift to the bots before turning in, and both the Toyenton suns had set before I tightened the last bolt on Colonel Swift's old MBU and signed off on the maintenance. I bit my lip, looking toward the deployment gate. The maintenance patrol wasn't until tomorrow morning, and I was supposed to meet Rocco, Pacha, and Papa Felix for drinks, but the allure of sable polymer armor courted me with a siren song of magnetic actuators and 6-point restraints. Her reactor's slow idle cycle even sounded expectant. The old girl wanted to run. I could feel it. What the hell? I said to no one in particular. I stashed my tool bag back in the buggy and climbed up the rungs set into Arden's legs. I swung around to the front cockpit access and parked my ass in the old jockey seat patched up with crude stitches and super tape. Took both hands on the barrel hatch to slide the heavy cylindrical door until it latched in place with an audible click, reducing my view of the tank bay to a thin sliver of transparent alloy. The maintenance schedule had been grease penned on the corrugated steel inside the door, mostly in my handwriting. None of the other maintainers liked working on Ardennes. The goggles and shunt hung from a hook above my head, but I ignored them for now as I found a switch glowing with green phosphor in the dark and flicked on the auxiliary power. The cockpit lights winked on with the hum of the battery fans, and I tilted the blinking system status monitor toward me. Proc Central Systems, Challenger Model N53XKYL, designation Arden. Welcome, Rande Vandelle, limited access pilot. Primary armament status, blank. Bulldog reciprocating rail cannon number 1, chamber clear. Bulldog reciprocating rail cannon number 2, chamber clear. Meteor magnetic indirect plasma projector, coils secure and uncharged. Universal 190 millimeter indirect launcher tubes number 1 through number 34, closed. Low caliber cannon array, belts disconnected, chambers number 1 through number 4, clear. Magnetronics, standing by. Countergravity, standing by. Awaiting reactor start clearance. As a maintenance tech, I couldn't authorize the cobalt induction reactor to spool up from idle to military power without higher authority. I flipped on the comm system and tuned it to base traffic control. A clicking whir behind me signaled the extension of Arden main of antenna for high and low frequency comms, radar, and positioning. 2 smaller antennae failed to extend, probably dirty stepper motors, so I noted them in the patrol log. Arden to Crow's Nest, request reactor startup clearance for maintenance patrol. Someone yawned at the other end of the channel, their nap probably interrupted by my call, and a feminine voice answered me. Vandelle, I don't see Arden on the schedule till tomorrow morning. I recognized the voice. Kaylee Kyle's my other best friend in the Chevaliers. Most people called her Tugs because she had a habit of pulling on her uniform shirt when distracted or nervous. I knew she didn't like the nickname, though, so I just called her by her name. Hey, Kaylee, didn't know they had you in the box tonight. I finished her maintenance up a few hours early and thought I'd try to take her out to sign off her patrol tonight instead. She didn't answer right away. I could see her in my mind, boots up on the counter at the central station aboard the Winter of Discontent, the company starship up in orbit. She has chubby cheeks that she'll puff out when she thinks, and a ponytail she likes to flip back and forth. From her station in orbit, Kaylee oversaw hangar ops for the 3 billets the local governor gave to the Chevaliers for operations. None of our squads were doing night combat patrols, so she was probably on watch alone. I gave myself 60-40 odds of being shot down. Kaylee doesn't like to step out of line, and her extra graveyard shifts are because she's angling for a permanent combat coordinator position. I heard the creak of an old chair shifting and braced as she came back on. I don't know, Vandelle. I don't want to catch heat for authorizing a deviation just so you can take a joyride in the Colonel's MBU. Damn. I almost slapped the inside of the cockpit hatch jam before catching myself. Didn't want the noise to translate over comms. But before I could respond, another voice crackled to life. Vandelle, said Dirty Rocco. He must have been listening on the open radio in the canteen. I'm here with Pacha and Felix, and Pacha says you're being very rude standing us up for drinks, which was a lie, of course, since Pacha only cared when a card game was on and he needed another victim. But if you'd rather spend the night running metrics in a rust bucket, then go ahead. Kaylee, use my credentials to adjust the schedule and grant the startup access. I'll take whatever heat comes back on you. Yes! Dirty Rocco came through for me again. I heard a sigh and a few keystrokes through the circuit, and the cobalt reactor behind the cockpit rumbled to life. I swore that after the patrol I'd cover Rocco's drinks for the rest of the night. Arden, you're cleared from berth 16 through gate 5. Don't have too much fun. Thanks, Kaylee, you're the best, I said with a grin. I know, just be liberal with the bourbon you've got stashed when you get back on the Winter, and don't get me on the shit list. How do you know about that? I asked. She just laughed. I secured the harness, then reached up and pulled down the goggles and shunt collar. It was time to slip into something more befitting the occasion.